All right, let's dive right into one of the most absolutely audacious multi-million-dollar heists ever pulled off against American taxpayers and vulnerable patients. Today, we're going to unpack a massive systemic vulnerability, one that essentially allowed bad actors to treat a critical government healthcare program like their own personal ATM.
Just think about this number for a second. $132 million. And we're not talking about a nationwide sweep here. That's just the combined amount of Medicaid fraud recently uncovered by task forces in merely 2 states, Ohio and Minnesota. In Ohio alone, recent charges hit over $42 million in alleged fraud, while a massive sweep up in Minnesota uncovered over $90 million. And remember, that is just what they've caught so far. It's a devastating direct hit to public funds that were supposed to care for our most vulnerable citizens.
So, where did all that cash actually go? Well, spoiler alert, it didn't go to helping kids with autism or vulnerable adults needing housing. Instead, fraudsters literally exploited the system to fund jaw-dropping, lavish lifestyles. We're talking fleets of exotic cars. In the Ohio takedowns alone, investigators seized 14 vehicles, including 6 Mercedes, a Bentley, a Maserati, and a McLaren. In Minnesota, they used the proceeds to buy high-end jewelry, Tesla Cybertrucks, and even snapped up over 20 different real estate properties just to expand their fraud network. It is just a staggering diversion of resources.
To figure out how the vault was left completely unguarded, we've got to look at the shift in how Medicaid actually operates. Historically, Medicaid billed for traditional medical care, right? Hospitals, doctors' offices, places with admission records, clinical notes, and physical buildings that are very easy to verify. But recently, Medicaid expanded heavily into home and community-based services. This means care is delivered privately, inside a patient's home. Suddenly, the system is relying on self-reported timesheets and honor system attestations. It is incredibly difficult to independently verify if a caregiver actually spent 4 hours in someone's living room on a random Tuesday.
Okay, moving to part 1, the heist. Let's break down exactly how these bad actors executed this playbook in Ohio and Minnesota.
This situation got so out of hand that the House Oversight Committee had to step in. They are currently investigating a mind-boggling $1.2 billion in potential fraud just within Ohio's home and community-based waiver programs. They are demanding answers because reports are showing that bad actors took full advantage of incredibly lenient enrollment requirements to essentially rob the system blind.
What's absolutely wild about Ohio is just how brazen these tactics were. We're not talking about somebody padding a timesheet for an extra hour here or there. I mean, there were literal billboards in Columbus advertising, hey, get paid to care for a loved one. Even crazier, investigators found these seemingly abandoned office buildings with weeks of piled-up mail, beeping smoke detectors, and stray cats wandering the parking lot. Yet one of those inactive buildings somehow housed 288 registered Medicaid companies that billed the government for $250 million over a few years. And if the state caught on and blocked one of these providers, no problem. They just used a trick called entity switching. They'd open a brand new company name the very next day and keep right on billing.
Meanwhile, Minnesota was facing its own massive crisis, resulting in the largest autism fraud bust in American history. Nearly $47 million in fraud was tied directly to early intervention autism programs. These fraudsters were allegedly paying kickbacks to parents just to bring their kids to centers, slapping autism diagnoses on them regardless of medical need, and billing for ghost services. On top of that, another $22 million was siphoned from individualized home supports, and almost $16 million drained from housing stabilization services. If you look at their technical playbook, it's pretty dark. They basically used highly vulnerable populations, like kids with autism and adults needing housing, as billing anchors to just drain the system dry. In one deeply disturbing case in Minnesota, a program billed for 24-hour care for a highly vulnerable patient, but tragically, that patient was found deceased a day after the services were supposedly provided. And these schemes became so notoriously lucrative that officials started seeing something called fraud tourism. Criminals were literally traveling from states like Pennsylvania all the way to Minnesota just to set up shop and exploit these programs.
So, that brings us to part 2, the security flaw. Why did the system fail so catastrophically?
You've got to be asking yourself, how on earth were there not enough checks and balances? How does a government-funded program just let hundreds of millions vanish with virtually zero friction?
It all boils down to this massive bureaucratic flaw called pay-and-chase enforcement. Basically, the system was built to process paperwork fast, not to actually investigate it. If a claim had a valid provider number, a valid patient, and a valid billing code, boom, the system paid it out automatically. Audits only happen retrospectively. By the time the state finally realized the services were totally fabricated, the money was already long gone, converted into those McLarens and multi-million-dollar real estate portfolios. Minnesota's Housing Stabilization Services Program is practically the perfect case study for this. It was this well-intentioned new benefit launched in 2020 to help people with disabilities find housing. Initially, the state thought it would cost about $2.6 million a year. But because it was so incredibly easy to enroll as a provider and oversight was virtually non-existent, payouts exploded to $26 million in year one. By 2024, it ballooned to over $104 million. The state finally realized they couldn't get a handle on the rampant fraud, so in October 2025, they had to terminate the entire program, which tragically deprives legitimate beneficiaries of the care they actually need.
All right, let's wrap things up with part 3, securing the vault. What does a crackdown look like, and how do we actually fix this?
The good news here, authorities are finally waking up. The Department of Justice and state officials are rolling out a massive, high-energy enforcement crackdown. They're setting up data sharing agreements across state and federal lines to quickly connect the dots on shady clinics. They've funded 15 new specialized trial attorneys just to fight Medicaid fraud nationwide. And the FBI even launched a most wanted fraudsters list to hunt down fugitives who stole taxpayer money. The goal is to identify these bad actors faster and lock them up.
But to truly fix the root cause, states are realizing they absolutely have to ditch that pay-and-chase model. They are starting to implement common-sense front-end prevention tools to stop the cash from leaving the vault in the first place. First, you've got to treat in-home services as high risk right from day one. Second, track the actual beneficial owners of these companies, not just the LLC name, so you stop the endless entity switching. Third, deploy prepayment data analytics, basically software that instantly flags impossible travel times or duplicate bills. And finally, mandate electronic visit verification, using basic tech to prove a caregiver is actually standing in the room they claim to be in.
And remember, this is not just an Ohio or Minnesota problem. The Department of Health and Human Services recently put it bluntly in a national report, stating that personal care services attendants are involved in more fraud convictions than any other provider type out there. It is a massive, systemic vulnerability impacting home and community-based programs coast to coast.
Which leaves us with one incredibly critical question for you to chew on today. If this kind of heist could happen so easily, draining hundreds of millions of dollars in the Midwest, what's happening in your state? Have your local representatives implemented the high-risk screening, the data analytics, and the tech verifications we talked about? Or is the vault door still wide open, with taxpayers quietly funding the next great heist?